Today we're going to be playing songs on the piano by ear. Awesome, right? Instead of summarizing all the theory on how it's done and rambling how everyone is able to do it, which is true by the way, I'm going to take you through 4 actual song examples, from easy to more advanced. This way you get to experience what it's actually like to play the piano by ear, meaning you can listen to any song and perform it on the piano pretty much instantly, without needing any sort of sheet music or video tutorials. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Thomas and I've been a pianist for 15 years now, mainly self-taught. I regularly post my own piano versions of songs that I enjoy, sometimes generating up to 1 million views. These are songs that I taught myself how to play using the exact same method I'm gonna explain to you today. So with all of that out of the way, let's jump right into the video. Alright, so we start with an instrumental piece we all know and love. Take a listen. Alright, so there's really not a lot going on here, which is useful for us because then we can really focus on finding the right notes. So how do we even do that? Well, if you've been following me for a while, you know that I preach a simple 3-step method, which is exactly what we're going to use here today. So we first look for the most recognizable part of the song, the melody in the higher end of the music. In this case, it's very simple and it goes something like la 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 la. And I'm not just singing here for fun. This is actually a really important part of finding the right notes, because if you sing out loud, then you can simply follow your voice with your hand on the piano, and you don't need to be a good singer for this. You just have to follow the note that you can hear. Then it suddenly becomes so much easier to find the melody. So in this case it will be la la. So the first note la. So not a G, it's higher. La, almost. La. There you go. It blends in perfectly, as you can hear. So then we can know for sure that that is our melody note. So if you were to do this for every note, this is the melody you would come up with. Now the second step would be to find the bass of the song, so the lowest notes in the music. This step takes a bit more practice as your ear instinctively focuses on the melody in the higher end. It's okay if you need to listen like 50 times in order to hear the right bass notes, which is what I often did when I first started out. You really have to approach it one note at a time. So in this Interstellar case, there's actually a really loud string section in the middle that stands out, and that might trick you into thinking that they are the bass notes. But if you listen very closely, there's actually a bass line moving underneath them. It goes like this. Now that is actually our bass. It's very subtle, but if you listen closely, I'm sure you will be able to pick it up. And again, to find it, sing out loud and play it slowly with your hand and follow your voice. Now if you do that, you end up with the following bass notes and melody. And I'll go through it a bit faster. Now before we head into our final step, which is adding the chords, there's actually something really simple you need to understand. And I drew this out for you on a little board here. Okay, so you see, Western music is actually very simple. 99% of it is based on simple major and minor chords. Now you don't even need to understand music theory in order to visualize this. I mean, take for example a note like C. If you want to create a major chord, all you have to do is follow this little rule. The 3-note gap and then the 2-note gap, which literally means you skip 3 notes and there you have your next note, and then you skip 2 notes, so you end up with these 3 notes. That is your major chord. Now this really works on every note, it's as simple as that. And for the minor chord, it's the exact opposite. You have a 2-note gap and then a 3-note gap. So that will be the black one here, and then skip 3. So that is your minor chord. Once you understand this little trick, playing songs on the piano becomes so much easier, as you will see in the following examples. Alright, so back to Interstellar. How do we find our first chord? Well, first we assume that there are probably 4 different chords, as we have 4 different bass notes. And usually the bass notes coincide with the chords. So what do? We have our first bass note is an F. It plays together with the melody on the A. Now, what you always have to do is bring the bass closer to the melody. Why, you ask? Well, that is because the bass and the melody always work together. They are played in a certain scale of notes, which I'll explain why in another video. But for now, all you have to understand is you have to bring them closer together, because that way, suddenly, you have two notes, an F and an A, with three notes in between them. And if you've been paying attention, you know that the three-note gap points to a major chord, assuming that that F that the bass note is playing is the first note of our chord, which is always a good starting point to assume. The bass note usually plays the lowest note of the chord. In this case, it does, because if you extend this with your two-note gap, so you have a major chord, and you play this major chord out loud alongside the song, then you will hear it blends in perfectly. So that must mean you have found the right chord. If you do this exact same step for the second bass note and the second chord, so you have these two, again, another chord will form itself. You have a three-note gap. Okay, so we fit it in with our two-note gap. Suddenly we have a major chord. If you play it out loud with the song, you will hear this is indeed the right major chord. So we already have two chords. For the third chord, it works exactly the same. If you bring up the A to the C, this time you see a two-note gap. Okay, so then we must follow up with the three-note gap to make our chord. And then we have a minor chord. Then we play it out loud to test if it's really the right chord, and we can hear it blends in perfectly. So we have our third chord. Now the final chord is a bit trickier in this case, because you end with these notes. So these two, once you bring them together, a chord doesn't immediately form itself. You have all this space. Now assuming again that the bass note would be playing the root note, and we want to make a major or either a minor, because most music is probably in the major or minor chord, then we can fill in this chord ourselves with either the B or the B flat, so the major or the minor. Now in this situation, all you have to do is play them out loud both and then hear for yourself which one sounds right. And in this case, you will hear it should be the major. Comment below if you've got it right yourself. By the way, a simple trick you can also use is check out the full perspective, the full song. The melody is playing this, right? So the B is getting played, but the B flat is not getting played. So that's a strong indication that the B flat is not featured in the piece at all, because it doesn't fit in that scale of notes. So then you could already assume that the G major would be the right chord. So the final verdict for Interstellar would be as follows. Now once you know the chords to a song, you can play it however you want. For example, this may seem like a big step, but it really isn't. If you're curious on how to upgrade music like this, I actually have a full training program that explains exactly that, which I'll talk to you more about later in this video. For now, let's continue to our second song. Alright, so for our second example, we actually have a very famous pop song. Take a listen. By the way, before we continue, I really recommend sitting behind your own piano and trying out the steps yourself before I give out all the answers. That way you can already start improving today, which is what it really comes down to. Daily, consistent practice. So let's jump right back into it. Alright, so what do we have here? We're simply going to apply the exact same steps from the previous song example. If you do that for the first step, the melody would turn out to be like this. So it's a very simple melody only featuring 3 different notes. Now if you were to do the second step for the bass line, I'd argue that this one would be even easier than the Interstellar one, because the bass is playing pretty loudly and it goes like this. Again, only 3 notes, so if we play these together, we come up with this. Alright, now to add the chords. In this case, we are again left with 4 bass notes, so presumably we have 4 different chords. Now for the first chord, we have the melody and the bass going like this. So there's not that much information to base ourselves on, but again, we're gonna play our bass note closer with the melody. And then we end up with this. Now we're gonna start with the simple assumption again that the bass note is playing the root note of our chord. And as you are well aware by now, in this case we can probably fill the chord in with our minor or our major, which we base on the note gap rule which I showed you on the whiteboard just now. Now, if you were to play both of these chords together with the song, you will quickly realize that the right chord should in fact be, I can already hear you say it, that's right, the D major chord. I mean, look at how beautiful this sounds. I don't want to overwhelm you, but there's actually a quick little trick that if you're delving deeper into music theory as your journey progresses, you would actually immediately know that this is probably a D major. Because the melody goes like this, right? So we also have this note. Now if we play these together, just if you know a bit about music theory, you know that the extended major chord with an extra note, a seventh note we call it, would be with this C sharp note. So this note already indicates that there's actually a major chord and not a minor, because the extended minor chord would be completely different. Okay, for our second note, we have this. So pretty much nothing, right? We just have these notes. So if we bring them together, well, a chord does seem to form, you see. You have a 2-note gap, so we skip 3 more. And then we have the F sharp minor. So this is probably our chord, right? And if you play it out loud, it sounds very good. So yeah, probably this is our chord. Right now we have this. So for our third note, we basically get no information whatsoever. Again, we have the same 2 notes. But it would be weird, right, if we have the same chord again. That's usually not the case, that one chord repeats itself. Sometimes it happens, but let's assume further. What do we have here? It's also probably not the case, because if we assume that the bass note is playing our root note again, which usually is the case, not always, we'll see that later. But yeah, then we don't have an F sharp minor chord, because our lowest note would be the A. So in this case, you really don't have a lot of information at all, except for our melody notes already playing this one quite a lot, right? So yeah, it makes sense to extend it with a 3-note gap to our C sharp, and then we suddenly can make a chord. And if you play this out loud, you will hear correctly that this should be the A major chord. It blends in very well. Listen, if I play the minor chord, I'll play the beginning part too, so you really get the sense of the dissonance, the clashing that I talk about. It sounds weird, right? Well, if we do the correct one, it sounds perfectly in harmony. So that's how we know we have our right chord. Now on to our final chord. We go back to the same note again, and we have the same movement again. So are we dealing with the same chord again as the second one? It may be the case. It's not that common that a chord repeats itself, even if there's a chord in between. But since we really don't have any other information, we should definitely try it out. And once you do, you hear that it actually sounds quite right, and that it should be the F sharp minor chord again. Now, you're always free to try out other chords, right, if you're not sure. But then probably once you try more of them, you will come to realize that, well, it actually should be the F sharp minor again. Sometimes it's as simple as that. So this song actually only features 3 different chords on 4 different bass notes. And this is what we end up with. That's it. Now on to our next song. Alright, so for our third song we have another pop classic. Hear this out. Alright, again, pause this video, try it out yourself, and then come back for the answers. So if you were to apply the first step, this is the melody that you would come up with. Very simple, right? You can make it a bit more complex even, because Indira, she uses her voice to move around a lot, so it goes like more like that, but it comes down to the same thing. Now for the bass, this one might have been a bit more tricky for you, because there seems to be some jumping going on, right? It goes like this. So how do we even begin to add chords to this song? Well, if you listen, the bass does move around, but there's a really strict pulse in this song, like so the bass emphasizes certain notes. So in this case, it will be very logical to assume that on the emphasized notes, there are actually the chords. So let's just assume that. And I know I keep assuming, but with playing music by ear, it's always about assuming certain principles. And sometimes it turns out it's actually not like you assume and you try out more things. But more often than not, it's actually the assumption that turns out to be true, because yeah, most Western music is pretty simple, to be honest. Alright, so now we established that we're dealing with 4 chords. We're gonna do the exact same thing as we did with our previous 2 examples. So for our first chord, we basically only have these 2 notes. So if we bring them closer together, we just do the same as we always do. We assume, okay, the bass is probably playing the root note of our chord. We have these 2 notes, we can fill them in, C major or C minor. You just try them out both, you listen, and you can hear, okay, it should probably be the C minor. But also, again, if you place it in a broader perspective and you see the whole melody, yeah, then you will see it's most likely a C minor, because the E is not getting featured in the melody at all, so it's probably not part of the scale of notes that we are dealing with. Alright, so the first chord is a C minor. Then on to our second one. So we just have these 2 notes. We just do the same as we always do. Quite simple, right? Once you get the hang of it. We can form an F minor chord. And if you play it out loud, okay, it actually is an F minor chord. Nice, we already have our second one. On to our third one. We bring these closer. Would you look at that? Again, a chord forms itself. It probably is that one, right? So we play it out loud with the song, and actually yes, it blends in perfectly. We have our third chord. So we already have 3 chords. And then for our final one, we have a D and an F. Now what do we do? Now here is where it gets trickier and why it's the third song example and not the first or the second. Because if you place these 2 together, you might think that, hey, okay, the bass is playing the root of our chord, so we already have our second one. Okay, so this is a minor chord, right? A D minor. If you play this together with the song, you will hear that something feels quite off. It's not, and it may take a bit of practice to hear this, but I promise you that even if you're a beginner, something feels quite off. It's not fully blending in. And that is because it actually is not blending in fully. The chord is wrong, and I'll show you exactly how. So we have established that the D chord is probably not the right one. So what do? We have nothing else to go on. Well, almost nothing, because it goes like this. Okay, so we also have a G. May be relevant for our chord. But if you see that if we place these 2 together, we have a 4-note gap, which we haven't seen before. So what does that mean? Well, I'll tell you. It means that our chord is actually inverted. It means that the root note of our chord is not played at the bottom. It's actually placed somewhere on top of the lowest notes. You don't even have to fully understand this, but once this happens and you have a 4-note gap, all you have to do is change one of the 2 notes down or up, so the positioning changes. For example here, if we placed G below the D instead of above, then we suddenly have a position that can form either a major or a minor chord. As you can see, 3-note gap and then 2, major, or 2-note gap and then 3, minor. Okay, we have 2 more chords to try out. So you play it alongside the song, and suddenly, when that G major drops and you play it, you can hear perfect harmony. That is the case, because you have actually found the right chord. So there you go. This is a very useful example for situations where the bass is actually not playing the root note of our chord, which tends to happen sometime also in pop music. So it's very good to be aware of it and to practice a lot of songs that have this going on. Now before we head into our final song, I would like to take a quick moment to tell you a bit more about my full piano by ear training program. If you enjoy my teaching and you would like to learn from dozens more song examples, then my full course might be for you. It comes with a daily schedule for optimal learning, as well as full guides to music theory and piano improvisation based on the music you learn to play by ear. Last but not least, it also comes with the ear training accelerator, which will help you hear full chords by ear instantly. This week I got my first review by one of the course participants, and he had nothing but praise for the full program. If you join today while the course is still piloting, you will get extra guidance and personal feedback, all at a discounted price. If that sounds interesting to you, make sure to check out the link down below. Now let's continue to our final song. Alright guys, we've made it to our final song. Check this out. So we're just gonna do what we always do. We start out with the melody. And by the way, there's actually, as you can hear, besides the melody, a bit of a choir going on in the higher end. And you see this sometimes happens with pop songs where we have some extra riff going on. That is actually very useful in case the melody is not enough and the bass is not enough to establish the chords. Maybe the extra notes can help us find the chords instead. Alright, so back to our melody. If you apply the step yourself, you will probably end up with these notes. So this is a bit of a tricky one, right? That's why I placed it last. The melody moves around quite a lot. Not only the melody, because if we apply step number 2, it will be pretty difficult because, as you can hear, the bass is moving around quite a lot. If you apply this step, and again, you may have to listen to this bass line like 50 times, maybe 100 times, because it actually goes quite fast, it's not too loud, so you really have to focus. But trust me, listen to it enough times and they will find the notes, and it will turn out to sound like this. Alright, so a beautiful bass line, but what the hell, we have so many notes, so how do we even know how many chords there are? Well, just like the last song, we're gonna focus on the pulse of the song, because although there are many notes, it feels like a bit like this, right? So probably on every beat or on every other beat there will be a chord. It will be highly unlikely that on every beat the chord will change, because that's something you would only see in an advanced jazz piece, because most pop songs only have 4 chords, right? Or maybe 5 or 6, but it won't change constantly. It's safest to assume that we have a different chord on every other beat. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So if you apply that beat to the notes we have, we end up with 4 sections of notes. And even though we have many notes going on, we're going to apply the exact same process to find our chords. For our first section, we would have this. So we have quite a lot of notes already in the first 2 beats. But we're just gonna bring them together like we always do, even higher, as you can see. And if you're paying attention, actually, almost all the notes, if you play them at once, suddenly you have a chord all at once. Now, if this happens and you have 2 of the same one at once, you can leave out one of the repeated notes. And that is because an extra note of the same one doesn't actually change the chord, so you only need one of them. Now, if we leave out the bottom one, we actually end up with a chord in its root position. A major, as you can see. Well, it will be very likely that this is the first chord of the song, and if you play it out loud, as always, you will hear it blends in perfectly, and that this is actually the first chord of our song. Alright, but then we go on to our second division of notes. So we first had this, and I'll stop at the second part. So we only have this to go on. So what you might do in this situation is, okay, we have these first 2 notes that collide. If we bring these together, we can actually form a major chord in its root position. But well, if you play it out loud with the song, you will hear something feels off. It probably is not the right chord, or at least we should try out more chords to make sure. Okay, so maybe we do have more information to go on. Well, yes, that is the case, because both the bass and the melody change further to a next note. And these 2 you can also bring together, right? And in this case you would end up with the exact same chord as our first one. Well, that's suspicious too. The chord probably doesn't repeat itself. It doesn't happen often. But if you pay attention, actually, if we have these 2 notes, you cannot only form a major chord starting from the G sharp, but you can also form an F minor chord if you start one below, because we had our 3 note gap here. we can make another 2-note gap below. And it's again means that the bass is not playing the root note, which we have experienced before too with the previous song. Okay, so we have another chord to try out. And if you do try this one out with the song, you will hear, whoa, this sounds pretty good. This might actually be our chord. So it will be best to assume that it is, and then continue to our next few chords. And then at the end, you can hear it in full perspective, and then you can really conclude like, okay, this is the right chord. So we now have these two chords. And then we go to our third subdivision of notes. So as you can see, there's a lot going on in the melody right here. And actually, if you're paying attention, like I keep saying, pay attention. A chord actually plays like, just like we saw with the first chord. We have this extra note, but for the rest of them, we have these notes. If you were to bring the bass up closer here, it actually forms into the melody which is already playing the chord. So most likely we are dealing with this G major chord. Now if you play it out loud with the song, you will hear it actually is a G major chord. So even though the melody was maybe quite hard to find because it moves around a lot and the bass as well, you see once we have both of these, the fact that they're moving around quite a lot actually helps us find the chord even easier because the notes already formed themselves. So we have 3 chords, we probably only have one left. Alright, so we have some movement going on right here. And the melody goes like... Alright, so it's very cramped up. If we play this one higher, then we kind of have the same notes in the melody and the bass. So it's not a very easy one to establish the chord here. If we start with these two, well, that's not a chord, so what then? In this case, what stands out, and you should really notice, is the bass is ending on the C and the melody is also going to the C. Okay, so the C is probably very important in this final bit. Well, let's assume for a second that the C is the root note here of the chord. If you then form the chord, either C major or C minor, and you play them both together with the song, you will hear that the C minor should be the correct chord in this case. Now you're free to try out more chords, and it's always a process of searching and searching until it feels right, and especially if you're just starting out, you're never quite sure, but the only way to really become confident at this is to just try out the chords and then just decide this is it. The first few times, of course, you will have it wrong sometimes, but that's just part of the learning process, right? And if you're not sure, you can always look up the chords yourself online. I mean, there's so many video tutorials of how to play songs or sheet music if that's your thing, so then you can just check, am I playing the correct notes? Of course, be aware of the sources you rely on, because there are many very bad tutorials out there that show just the complete wrong chords. But at the same time, there are also many good sources to learn from, also for free. And of course, there are paid options like my full training program. So there you have it, guys. We've gone through all 4 songs together. I hope you learned anything new today, and if so, make sure to let me know down in the comments. If there's anything you take away from this video, I hope it is that playing the piano by ear is not that magical after all. You just have to learn the fundamentals and keep practicing with new songs. That way, music doesn't really surprise you anymore. With all that being said, thank you so much for watching this video, and make sure to subscribe and hit that bell for more awesome piano tutorials and arrangements in the future. I hope to see you all soon. Goodbye.